Dani Ceballos is not supposedly going to be an Arsenal player next season, is the latest information that we have. And it comes as a pretty big blow to many an Arsenal fan that enjoyed watching Dani last season. It was frustrating having to watch many players after Santi Cazorla fail to be sort of a little dynamic figure in the middle. And Ceballos gave us a bit of a reprieve from that drought that we experienced. But it seems that the drought could return and go on a little bit longer if Arsenal don't manage to re-sign the Spaniard. And it's looking increasingly unlikely that that will happen. But we're going to discuss that and a lot more in today's Tactical Breakdown podcast. Drew, my good man, how are we?
Good morning, Precious. How are you?
I'm very good, thank you. Well, I was better.
And then I called you Precious.
Yes, that happened too. We won't discuss that again. But no, I was better before I found out the news about our boy Dani, Dani boy, which is frustrating, obviously. Just to get your sort of initial reaction to that news, how are we feeling?
Kind of surprised. Simply because, every report out there was saying that Ceballos and Zidane did not want to work together at all. He was completely out of any scope of planning at Real Madrid. So to have like that kind of massive turnaround out of nowhere, A, surprising. I don't think anyone saw that coming. But B, it throws a huge monkey wrench in our summer plans. I think it became very apparent that Arteta quite likes Ceballos. I think he, as he settled under Arteta, he became quite an actual pretty essential figure for us in midfield. And I think he was doing a job that no one else was capable of doing at the time. I think moving forward, he was going to have a big role to play, maybe further forward up the pitch. So to hear that we might have to replace him now as well, I can't imagine that anyone right now is currently happy at the club, at least. So yeah, it might be a tough pill to swallow for us, but it wouldn't be an Arsenal summer without another monkey wrench. So
it's not ideal, is it? To be honest, it's a bit frustrating. Obviously, Arsenal are now in the situation where we're going to have to. Obviously, it was going to cost us a fair chunk of money to replace him or re-sign him. It was a fee of about 23 million. That was the original figure I heard, which actually, when you think about the quality of the player, is a steal, in my opinion. And maybe things just got too good to be true. And maybe Real Madrid woke up and realised that actually this is a hell of a player. I mean, if you look at how Real Madrid are at the moment with their midfield situation, you've got Toni Kroos, you've got Luka Modric, you've got Casemiro, and these are players that are not exactly young. These are players that are very experienced, that do have an expiry date on their careers. And Ceballos, as a 23-year-old player, is very, very attractive for Real Madrid. But as you said, the biggest stumbling block for Ceballos was always going to be Zidane. When he joined, he wasn't exactly in favour under the Frenchman, and that continued, and that's one of the biggest reasons why he was allowed to leave on loan. Ideally, Real Madrid would have wanted him to leave permanently at the time, but no one was willing to pay what they wanted to get for him, and that meant he left on loan, and there was always the chance he could return, but it looked so slim. And whenever we talk to any of sort of our Spanish experts, Kieran Quayle was talking about how if Zidane's there, he's not coming back. If John Driscoll was talking about the very similar thing. And that's now suddenly changed. Do you think it's those performances in the sort of the FA Cup semi-final and final that kind of tweaked Real Madrid's sort of manner and made them realise, oh, this guy can perform in these really big matches?
I mean, it's very possible, but also, I mean, I guess we can't really discredit the notion that people above Zidane would be making that choice for them. Again, if you look at the squad, I think Kroos, I think he's already 30. If not, he's about to become 30, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But when you plan long term, you have to plan for the eventuality that he's going to get older. Luka Modric is past 30. Casemiro is a strictly holding midfielder. So if you look at their options, not only are they all getting up there in age or soon to be, but none of them are really the player profile that Ceballos actually is, really. And none of them are really that tactically flexible either. So just for building purposes, for how you want to look at your squad, he would make sense, for them to try to keep. And I know there's a lot of people in chat already talking about the fact that he would go back there and he wouldn't play, but I don't think he would be expecting to walk into their 11 currently either necessarily. But obviously Real Madrid are always in Europe. They take the cup competitions quite seriously, of course. So it's not that he wouldn't get minutes. And certainly, I guess, moving forward, you can correct me if I'm wrong. Didn't he say if he could have the choice, he would want to stay at Real Madrid as well, or stay in Spain?
I don't think I've never seen any quotes from him regarding that, especially while Zidane's there. Zidane doesn't like him, and he doesn't really like Zidane.
I mean, so if Zidane left, wouldn't his preference be to remain in Spain if Zidane wasn't there?
It probably would be. Obviously, he's a Spanish speaker. I don't think he's fluent in English yet, even after the year that he's spent here. Which is and naturally, Spaniards, whilst do move, as we've seen from lots of them,
of course,
you do see a lot of. I mean, the pinnacle in Spanish football, especially as a Spaniard that's typically not from Catalonia, is playing for Real Madrid. And so for that reason, Ceballos would be more than happy. Of course, it was at Real Betis and did really well there. And our good friend, Drew, if you've noticed this in the chat, provided a super chat, Arian, said, could Partey be the Ceballos replacement? And we know that that's not going to be the case because Ceballos is certainly not the same position as what Partey would come in to fill. For me, Partey is your 6'8", and Ceballos, whilst has played a kind of a 6'8" position this season because of the system that Arteta was implementing in his midfield 2, where both Xhaka and Ceballos had to do defensive duties because there was no additional midfielder to give them that security of being able to drift forwards. That we know that Arteta's long-term plan is to switch to a 4-3-3, fingers crossed. And if that is the case, Ceballos would certainly be looking at playing a solid number 8 rather than the 6'8" role that Partey would come in to fill.
Yeah, I mean, I would probably tend to agree with you. I mean, nothing that anyone has ever discussed about Partey would make it seem that in an ideal world, Ceballos and him are similar players. They're very different players. And credit goes to Ceballos for filling in a tactical role that we had a need to, that needed sorting, and he's done an excellent job. The fact that he is quite mobile as a midfielder means that it was easier for him to maybe slot back in further, like a little bit deeper on a pitch and clean things up, press a bit more in the middle third. He did a good job. But again, this is not a debate I'm planning on rehashing today. But simply that when you look at how he's performed across every other team or club he's played for, bar Arsenal, he's been used further forward as that sort of 8-10 or even as a winger for Spain under 21s at times. So he has the tools and the capability and track record to be pushed further forward up the pitch. So I think ideally that's where he would probably be. And again, I think you look at the season, this was never going to be a point where we were going to see everything Arteta would want to do. For whatever tactical need or because of the way the squad looks. I don't think we're going to be stuck with 3 at the back moving forward. I don't. I think there'll be some variation of 4-2-3, 1-4-3-3, which are essentially the same thing in the first place, with one slight tweak. So, yeah, this is going to be potentially a tough one to deal with. And again, because this is something like, if he wants to be sold last minute, we're going to get some sort of financial compensation for him. But the fact is, if we lose Ceballos and if we also sell Guendouzi and or Torreira, that's a lot of midfield replacements we have to bring in. So the rebuilding job gets, again, that's not just a small monkey wrench. It's a pretty big monkey wrench. That means we need at least 2 or 3 midfielders in the summer window. If we're not playing, and that's including the fact that Willock is already at the club. So the job got slightly more difficult. And maybe not necessarily in terms of players we can target, but certainly financially, it got slightly more difficult. I don't think anyone was expecting that, for sure. So it still might not come off. He still might not leave. That kind of remains to be seen, of course. But yeah, like again, I said, wouldn't be an Arsenal summer without some nonsense occurring.
Yeah, I mean, more than just nonsense. Lots of it is typical of what we see in Arsenal summer. And that kind of poses the question then, where do Arsenal go from here? And does this kind of change Arteta's plans looking forward? Let's look at it from a tactical perspective. as we kind of looked at it previously, we know that Ceballos' best position is as a number 8. And I mean, Graham Hunter, when he came onto the show, confirmed that as his best position as well. And as a forward-thinking number 8 as well. And when we were talking about sort of the system that Arteta wants, he wanted Ceballos to effectively play that role as a midfield 2. And I think the added role that he would like would be to add 2 number 8s with a number 6 in behind. Be that Partey, be that someone else, we don't know as of yet as to what his plans are. But do you think now that Ceballos seems more likely not to have that position, do you think Arteta might change what he wants to do with the formation, or do you think he'll still continue on and just try and find a like for like?
I think he might still kind of continue on. Again, this is predicated on the notion that we feel he's going to go with, a 4-3-3 with 2 8s. But I think he's also shown that, given what he has available to him as player resources, he'll tweak things to make it work for the best possible scenario that he can come up with. And that's a sign for me of a manager who's willing to be flexible based off of certain parameters maybe that are out of his control, which is a good thing. There's no point in trying to force players into a system or scenarios where they're not best suited. And I think that's one of the pitfalls that we dealt with Unai Emery with. It's not that he was inherently a poor manager because his track record speaks differently. It was more of, for someone who kind of lauded about how he knows how he wants to use every player, it was clear that he didn't know how to use our players well. And that's key, especially if you're going to go into a season where you're looking to maybe push on and challenge top 4 now instead of waiting a couple of years. It's vital that you get the best out of your players from match day 1. So I don't think we'll try to do any more square pegs and round holes. At least that's my hope. But also based off what we've seen, I don't think that's going to be the case. Largely, at least, maybe with 1 or 2 exceptions. So, yeah, I mean, like I said, we'll come on to it, for the rest of the show about how we maybe can look to replace Ceballos if he does leave. But I do think that maybe something that Arteta has already been public in saying could be a solution that fans aren't really considering. So, yeah, I don't know. I'm not much more to say unless we're going to keep going in the same circle about it. But,
Yeah, no, I understand what you mean. It's the players that are out there that could replace Ceballos is the issue is that there aren't really too many that are very similar to him, to be honest. Morgan Sansom is someone that was, obviously, we looked at on the Tactical Breakdown show. A lot of players want to see Aouar brought in as well. I've seen about Roca. I mean, Gustavo says there, Roca, Sanson, Zakaria. These are all players that play different positions and different roles within those positions as well. So in terms of player names, which is always the hardest thing to come up with, where are you sort of looking as players that you would like to see come in now that it seems he isn't going to stay?
I mean, I don't know. The problem is, it's easy to go through this kind of discussion and talk about who I think the club should replace player X with when finances aren't a problem, but finances are a struggle for us, as we've seen. So it's difficult, and it's funny because I probably wasn't in this camp a year ago, or maybe even 6 months ago, to be frank. But I've become more increasingly open to the idea of trying to see if Emile Smith-Rowe can fill into his role. I know a lot of people might say that might be slightly crazy, but the way he's come on after this long period, the way he's developing physically as a footballer, the tools he does have can be easily transitioned into a more central creative role than being chucked out wide, I feel. He's good on the ball. And he's intelligent for his age. So I know it might not be ideal, but again, I think if finances weren't a problem, I wouldn't even have to postulate that. Maybe we could bring him on slightly slower moving forward and his responsibilities. But Arteta has gone on record himself saying he sees that he wants to keep him, that he could have he has a role to play this season, but I don't know if anyone expected him to have that big of a role. So if we can't handle it, obviously we have to look into the market, but it's got to be someone who can come in and do a specific thing. I don't think we need someone like Partey for a player who does what he does. It's telling because we'll bring in potentially bringing in a player who is about to hit his prime. He's one of the best in the world for his type of player profile, not necessarily his just strict position, but for what he is capable of doing on the pitch. It's going to cost us, obviously. The reports came out of how much his potential wage packet's going to be, the fact that Atleti want all the money up front, no structuring of the deal. That's also a big chunk of what we're able to do financially off the bat. And there's no guarantee of how we're going to sell. And I think a lot of people have come to that realization that, we've been trying to sell Mustafi for 2 seasons and we haven't been able to do it as a prime example. Soccer just said he doesn't want to leave. Like, these are little things that we have to kind of factor in. Again, I think I struggle to think of a player who would come in for a fee that we actually want to be able to tackle, that we can do it. Obviously people will still say Jobuslai, but it's another 25 million pounds out the door. We don't know what his wages are going to be like, little things. So that's why I think if you can replace in-house, it's not a bad thing. It really isn't. But again, it's a tough ask because it's different when you want to replace in-house when you're not trying to aim to finish top 4 this season. If our aims are different, if we were trying to get back into, say, 6th or 7th, if Arteta was the type of manager who'd want to go out and try to actually win Europa League, I think that'd be maybe a more viable option. But considering I think our goals are going to be, or at the time they were, accelerated, I don't know if someone like, as much as I think that he's going to come on and be a brilliant player, I don't know if even Sisto is the answer. But he might have to be just because of how finances are working out. I don't know. What do you think? I know you're going to – you and I have talked about this before. We have links to other players, but, we haven't actually sat down. You haven't actually given me a direct thought about who. So now I'm going to put you on the spot.
Oh, God. As I said when I asked you the question, it's like you can't pinpoint a specific player that's going to come in and do the same exact thing that we've seen from Ceballos this season. Effectively, what you saw from Ceballos this season was a huge surprise. I did not expect to see Ceballos playing so well in such a deep position in the sort of 2 midfield that Arteta went for, which is why it's got so many people deceived to think that's now his best role, because it's honestly such a surprise to see him doing so well in that position, because that's not where he naturally would be playing. Yeah. So, and that's great. It's wonderful that he's done that, and it's wonderful that he's been able to sort of be that versatile player that can play in a deeper midfield role, in just a normal centre midfield position, or as a more creative player, which is where I think his best role actually is. And we haven't really been able to see that from him this season because he's always been playing so much further back. He started off, you saw the Burnley game. That was the Ceballos I thought we were going to see for the rest of the season. This creative player was showing flair, linking up the play between the midfield and the front line. I thought that was going to be the player that we'd see for the rest of the season, but it wasn't. Obviously, he dipped in form a lot under Unai Emery, but I feel like I'm dodging your question as much as feasibly possible.
Yeah, for sure, but it's okay.
The thing about Jobuslai is I don't get, if we have £25 million, which was going to be put aside to clearly do this Ceballos deal, I don't know why we wouldn't invest.
Just chuck it at him, yeah.
And just chuck £24 million, which is supposedly his release clause, at him. I don't think any of the links are credible between Arsenal and Jobuslai at all. I think it's completely made up by the media. I'm not saying that he's not on Arsenal's radar in terms of their scouting. I'd be very surprised if he wasn't. But I can't imagine there's been any contact between Arsenal and Red Bull Salzburg whatsoever that's led to any sort of concrete links come out through the media. It's just, I feel like, if anything, it's been us over here just constantly pressing and shouting it through the Twitter spheres and social media that has caused so many other people to bring him up. And it's a struggle because finding players that can play. Morgan Sanson I'll bring up again because he has played in that centre midfield role where he does a lot going forwards, he does a lot going back as well for Marseille. The thing is, speaking to Jeremy Smith, Jeremy said that his level is Ligue 1. Like that, he wouldn't expect. And if he moved to the Premier League, it would be for a Newcastle or for a West Ham type of team. I really liked Pablo Fornals before he left Villarreal, but he went to West Ham and just hasn't cut it at West Ham. I thought he'd be a good signing for Arsenal at the time, and I can hold my hands up and say, having watched that, it's definitely he not been the
correct.
case. Maybe it would have been different had he have moved to Arsenal. And actually, Archie brings up a great player, and you'll be able to tell me more about it. But Nkunku from Leipzig, is he someone that you would look at that position? Because when I watched him for Leipzig, he was one of their best players on the pitch, but you seemingly don't like him.
I'm just shaking my head because it's not realistic. And
okay. But in
terms of the player, I mean, you want to say sure, but Leipzig use him in a way that we wouldn't tactically. So a lot of the reasons why he's come on so well is because he's been in a far different role, far different than what he was playing with at PSG. Really, it brings a lot of his creative qualities. Obviously, he's far more forward thinking. He is still tactically versatile. So if he wanted to come back in and slot, essentially he probably could handle it. But I think people are using that as a very isolated example of this was him at his absolute best under a manager who is known for getting the absolute best out of what he's given, and the tactics quite suit him to the ground. So there's no guarantee that's going to translate here, and people shouldn't expect him to come in and then come back essentially and put up the numbers that he did. It's not that he necessarily couldn't, but not the type of player he is or isn't. Notwithstanding, we just wouldn't be able to afford it. There's no point even discussing it. Zero. So, and similar to the same about.
Someone said Lorenzo Pellegrini as an option, and just looking, and I'll throw this up on the screen now for people to see his heat map from this season. It should be up on the screen now. So Pellegrini's if I just do it for Serie A and Coppa Italia and the Europa League, so he's obviously a more advanced player than what Ceballos was this season. That's the sort of heat map you'd expect to see from Ceballos when he was playing at Betis. But if we're looking for a player that's going to come in and replace that, because the issue is that we're all making the assumption that Partey could come in. I was assuming that Ceballos would come in, and the thing about what's great about Ceballos is that he gives you the option to play him in multiple positions now, and I think that's probably one of the biggest reasons why Real Madrid want to keep him, because he's such a brilliant. He's a utility player which starts. That's what I mean. He's a player. He's not just one. He's not an Ainsley Maitland-Niles that wouldn't necessarily get into the first team, but the fact that he can play multiple positions means he plays quite a few games. Ceballos can play plenty of positions in the midfield and starts week in, week out for me. And there's an argument to say that he could be starting for Real Madrid next season, because the way that some of the players like Kroos has dropped off, Modric is not getting any younger, Casemiro has not performed as to the level which I think that he can. I feel like Casemiro can be better. And then you look at the younger players that are coming through, like Federico Valverde. Odegaard, obviously, is there's rumours that he might get brought back this season. It was agreed that he'd go back to Real Sociedad for another season on loan, but because he performed so well, he could be coming back. And, of course, he was managed by Zidane at Real Castilla as well. So he knows about how good Odegaard is now and what he's become. But Odegaard was playing as a number 10 this season, which is the first time he sort of played that well. I say number 10, kind of an 8-10. But before that, he was always playing on the wing, and he's kind of transitioned into the middle now and done really well there, which gives Real Madrid an option. Isco just isn't really the player that left Malaga and joined Real in his first 2 seasons. He's kind of dropped off as well. So Real have got a lot of sort of quandaries about who goes where. And the reason why Ceballos is probably coming back is because he solves quite a lot of those quandaries, that you can play at a really high level in multiple midfield positions. If you look at Pellegrini, though, I don't think Pellegrini is the player that you bring in to replace Ceballos. The guy that you bring in to replace Ceballos has to be a centre midfielder that can play both in a deep position and someone that can create in the final third as well for me, because we've lost such a massive part of our team and what Arteta would want to use him for. And he also, say for instance, what you have in our midfield now is Torreira, who is set as a defensive midfielder. You have Xhaka that is set as a centre midfielder that has had to play slightly deeper maybe because of playing in the midfield too. But for me, Xhaka is, and we can talk about Xhaka in a whole separate podcast.
Well, it's not. I don't want to.
But he is a centre midfielder for me. Like, he might be a deep line playmaker, or whatever you want to call him, but for me, he's a centre mid. Like, the way he's passing and his movement, and the way that he affects the wide areas of the pitch, he's a centre midfielder. And our other players in the midfield just can't match the same versatility that Ceballos can at that similar level. We've got Emil Smith-Rowe coming through that is, I hope, could play as a number 8. I hope that he could get developed into a really solid ball-carrying number 8 in the midfield, because he's a fantastic technical player on the ball and he can carry the ball really well. But he has played in a more advanced role. He's played in a wide position. Even for us, he's played in a wide position in the Europa League. I would hope to see that Emil Smith-Rowe can really develop this season and break out similarly to what we saw with Saka last season. And it'd be amazing to see if he can do that. But the names that are being thrown out at the moment, like Golovin, I'm seeing front up, who's really didn't to Monaco. And then you've got Pellegrini, who's clearly a more attacking-minded midfielder. But the names that I want to see from people are more so players that are centre midfielders that can do a job both in an attacking, creative sense, but also have a solid work ethic and an engine to get back. And I know I'm starting to think about Aaron Ramsey popping into my head, but I don't want people suggesting Aaron Ramsey because his wage is stupid. And he's just of an age now where we'd have no resale value for the fee that we'd have to pay for him or for the player that we'd have to swap him for. So someone brought up Zielinski. I like Zielinski at Napoli.
Yeah, I was just typing that in the chat, actually. That's a very under-the-radar type of name you don't hear people throw around a lot. But the fan bases now, I see, I'm going to have to now defend this hill to the death like I did with Meccano, but the fan base is not starting to crop up with Zakaria names now, and that's frustrating the absolute shit out of me. He's literally a straight out and out defensive midfielder, which, while you could argue we certainly need that.
Sorry, who are you talking about?
Zakaria.
Oh, Zakaria.
Like Gladbach. Yeah. We could argue that all day that we need like a really good holding type central player to come in, but he is nowhere near close to the type of player Ceballos potentially could be, or the type of player who can pick the ball up and drive play forward and play between the lines and affect play in the final third. That's just not what he does at all, period. So
areas heat map there. So
no, it's 90% of the match. You know, he will get forward on the odd chance. He can actually shoot from range, which is quite good, but Xhaka does the same thing, sits deep most of the time. We'll take a pop from range if he can. He affects play from deeper. That's not going to help us drive play forward. That's going to make us still a very much a periphery team. We need someone who can affect play in terms of, let's just not just play on 30 yards, you know, and playing balls in a half moon shape around the box. We need to get into the final third. So Weston McKennie is an interesting shout. He has some interest from someone like Saints. Saints were pretty involved in and wanted to bring him in to replace Højbjerg. I like him as a player, and this is no American bias. I think he's actually a pretty good young player or younger player, but again, I don't see enough from him in the final third for it to be that type of midfielder who we need.
Passing the final third, only 4 per game, which is quite low for a midfielder.
Yeah, he's I would say he's like a hybrid of a box to box and a holding player. He's not that, again, he's not, and for what he does, he's good at it. Yeah, but he's not the type of player that we really need. And it might have to be one of those scenarios where we look at bringing in a player who is traditionally a more attacking player in central areas, but we dropped it back just a little bit in a 4-3-3 and just give them license to bomb forward.
He's kind of, I feel like he's surplus at.
I mean, yeah, but even if that's the case, what on earth would he want to come here for? And how much is that going to cost? And what are the wages?
Trophy, the Audi Cup.
Jesus Christ. Yeah, so it's I don't know. It's not gonna, like I said, it's not gonna be as easy as people think to kind of bring in. And I think maybe people didn't expect this from Ceballos, and I think you mentioned this before, but they saw from him just how versatile he is, both in where he can play and how he can play, and that's actually a pretty rare quality. Even though you want players to be versatile as footballers, it's playing. I mean, he can play 3 different jobs in midfield. Ajax number system notwithstanding. So it's this is probably, I think, going to end up being our biggest hurdle this summer.
Adam Stroud said Maximilian Arnold from Wolfsburg. as a
Yeah, but
I don't think it's the level. That's not the level that we
he's
need.
not.
No,
No, I actually think he's roughly where he's going to end up for his
that's
career,
wild.
and I think he came up when he was a little bit younger. People had maybe higher hopes for him, but it's never really transitioned. He dealt with a couple of serious injuries, and that kind of set him back a bit. I wouldn't personally say that he should be starting for a club who's looking to get back into Champions League regularly. Donny van de Beek is a good shout. He is versatile. He can play further forward in effect games in the final third. He can play a traditional, straight center midfielder. He can even drop back deeper. But I do agree with Gustav that he's probably going to be more than what we're going to want to spend. He's certainly going to be more than what it was going to cost to bring Ceballos on a full. He was going to be more than £25 million, so probably like something like 40. And Ajax do good business. They get full value for players when they lose them. So there's not going to be any way to really try to talk them down. Again, I mean, I like the fact that people are bringing up some cool names for us to look into, obviously, but this is going to be a tough job. I'm not looking forward to this. But then you could also argue that
left side, isn't
he? Tapasha, how do we know that Willian's not going to be a forward-thinking CM/attacking midfielder for us? We don't know that. We don't know. We could be bringing in Willian to play him centrally. We haven't even figured that out yet. We don't know. Assuming the deal comes off as it should, that's a possibility because he has played centrally quite often. I think he's made over 100 appearances essentially, and his return and goal involvement is something like 0.51 goals and assists per appearance. So every 2 matches, he's getting a goal and assist from playing centrally. So,
look at that creativity centrally. Smith Rowe. I mean, obviously those passes that are in grey are the ones that are unsuccessful, but it's the point that he's trying to get those balls into the box more centrally. You can see these small passes in the middle of the pitch as well that are going through. He obviously likes to get into wide areas. Mainly that left-hand side is where you see him pop up in an attacking sense. And that would mean that you're putting him more on the left side of a midfield three, which is weird because, of course, Xhaka would, for me, play there as a less offensive style player. You could talk about playing Xhaka in the deepest midfield position against the teams that are lower down the league. And I think that's something that Arsenal which don't do enough is we can panic sometimes and think that we're not going to have enough security, but we don't often create enough chances because we're not brave enough with our team selection against those sides. We should be putting Xhaka at the deepest part of the midfield to be the guy that is putting the passes out and connecting the defence to the midfield. Of course, if we get Partey in, he can do that job in any game that we play. But Xhaka, for me, should be being positioned in the deepest part of the midfield against the smaller teams. And then we should be playing 2 more offensive-minded midfielders ahead of him to add more creativity in a central area. And Emile Smith-Rowe, I feel, can be that person. You put him there. And that's what I'm gutted about Ceballos, because I would have loved to have seen a tandem of Ceballos and Emile Smith-Rowe next to each other with someone behind them, be it Xhaka or Torreira or Partey, if we were to sign him, just to see how much sort of creativity and freedom those two would be given, but allowing them to do that. So
and in fairness, that's one of the pros and cons that you got from Xhaka when he was at Gladbach. They strictly normally played with a midfield too. It was him and Mahmoud Dahoud, and Dahoud is very forward thinking. So at that point, and maybe still at that point, Gladbach are a side that look at the table and the fixture list and say we really only are really behind Bayern, Dortmund, now RB Leipzig, and maybe arguably Bayer Leverkusen at the absolute most. So most of the matches they're playing against sides who they feel they should be beating. And at that point in time, much of the same was thought. So they would always just sort of have him be the deepest of the two, who would go for the forward. And when it came off quite well. When it didn't work, it bit them in the ass. So that's kind of the pro and con of doing it. And you could argue that we should be doing that more against teams that are going to sit deeper in those lower blocks and they're going to be more difficult to break down. But I think the angst amongst the fan base and maybe some management has been our inability to deal with one single ball over the top that would bypass someone like Xhaka, or the fact that positionally we were all over the shop constantly and players were reneging on responsibilities in terms of when and how to track back, who to cover when and how to track back. Like these are the little things that we've never really nailed on before to really allow that type of system to be deployed against those sides that are going to sit deeper. If we can do that with Arteta, that'd be a huge and important thing that we can really sort of have in our handbag to use. But we don't know what's going to happen yet. So, yeah.
Yeah, there's some more suggestions in the chat I'm seeing. Rydog says Xhaka is too slow to be the shield. That's why Arteta had him pressing high and Ceballos dropping deep. And I mean, the issue with that point is that he can be enabled to be the shield if he's disciplined enough to sit. But for me, positionally, if Xhaka sits and allows the two midfielders in front of him to do the pressing, I mean, it kind of contradicts the point by saying that's why Ceballos did one thing and Xhaka did the other thing. That's because they were playing in a two. In a midfield three, it's a different story. And that's what we're trying to get the point across here. And I mean, if you ever needed any more proof that even in a season where Ceballos has arguably played deeper than any season ever in his career, even then he's still got increased intensity in the final third of the pitch. So if you needed any more proof of that, it's there for you all to see on the screen. So yeah, start rounding things down. So if you've got any final questions for us, please do throw them in the chat box now. There was one of a bit un-Ceballos related that I just want to get your thoughts on, and that's this latest link about Callum Chambers. I don't know if you've seen it.
If it happened this morning, I did not see it. No.
Fulham are in for a £12 million move for Callum Chambers. Now, I have basically defended the valuation of £12 million for a number of reasons. I said, one, he's coming off the back of an injury. Two, if he was worth between 15 and 20 million pounds, which is what other people are saying he should be, then I'm sorry, but clubs that can afford that amount of money in this window are buying a different player than Callum Chambers for 15 to 20 million pounds this summer. The clubs that can't afford that are the ones that are going to be in for him. And therefore, that's why it sort of justifies that £12 million price tag. And I don't think he has improved since coming from Southampton. I arguably saw a better Callum Chambers in his first season at Arsenal than I've seen since then. And maybe that's harsh, but I don't think I've genuinely seen a massive improvement in the defender since he arrived from Southampton that much, to be honest. Please tell me if I'm wrong.
I mean, I can't tell you if you're wrong per se. It's your opinion, and you're entitled to that. But you're wrong. I'm just kidding. No, yeah, it's how you analyze it. Again, I mean, you bring up some good points. It's hard to command a position where you feel like you need to get the maximum monetary compensation for a player who really hasn't come on as well as you thought, who hasn't even logged the amount of appearances you would hope. He's dealt with injuries. I also don't think he's actually improved all that much. So, I mean, all these factors point to the fact that you'd be crazy to try to sit there and demand 20, 25 million pounds for a player who hasn't performed like that long enough for that to be justified. I think he's had little spurts here and there where he's shown that he could be a good player consistently if the chips fell for him. But and I think given the COVID market, given a lot of different factors, I think 12 million is still 12 million, and I hate for us to actually have to go ahead and say that. Yeah. But them's the bricks when you've been missing out yearly on Champions League and you're not getting the revenue. We missed out on an absolute truckload of matchday revenue because of COVID. We're going to miss out on a truck more of matchday revenue because of COVID next season. That's been made clear that we don't know when fans are going to be allowed back to the ground. Certainly not when the season starts. Mm. So unfortunately, I mean, I just don't see him having a massive role to play moving forward under Arteta, even under the best of circumstances. I feel like he's not going to get in ahead of Mustafi or Luiz or Mari when Mari's fit, or Saliba or Holding when Holding is fit. So you're talking about a player who's going to end up being, at best right now, the sixth choice center back at the club. We're not going to use him as a DM, most likely. We don't need him as a right back because he'd end up being if we keep Ainsley Maitland-Niles, he's going to end up being the fourth choice right back, and if he leaves, he's going to end up being the third choice right back. So yeah, if you can get 12 million for a player who is sixth or third in your depth in two different positions, I think you go ahead and you take it. And I think that's going to seem harsh, but and I'm not saying that Chambers isn't better than Holding, and I'm not saying that Chambers didn't perform in certain moments. I'm pretty sure I did say that he's both shown in spurts that he can be a good player, and both that it's just a matter of where he's fit in, hasn't really ever fit in really that well enough to say that we're forced to keep him. I don't think he's forcing our hand and saying this player is vital for us. We can't sell him. And if we do sell him, he's got to be for enough money. You know what I mean? It's a tough position to take. So no, I'm not saying that he's like some sort of worthless football. I think that's what people have somehow translated my words into saying. That's not what I'm saying. I'm saying when you look at the nature of what has happened to him and with him, it's hard for us to take a strong hand position. It's irrespective of how good he has been in certain moments or how good he could be. You have to look at it for what it has been up to this point. And I think that's all I'm saying. You know, and I don't think we're in a position where we can risk and sit and hope, you know, that. And would we really be going out and worrying about all these other defenders if he had a bigger role to play? I don't really think so. So, regardless of how we view the player, I don't think that necessarily matters. And I'm not saying that to be rude, of course, but you know, I don't see anything that indicates he's going to have a big role to play moving forward. And if that's the case, then you kind of part ways and you take what you get and you move on. So.
Yeah, I love how short memory sometimes people can have, because I've seen the amount of people that are in the chat box there, and thank you so much, people, for joining us. And of course, we're all talking about opinions and whether they're right or wrong. We die by our sword every single time. But I think some people are forgetting, of course, when they're saying that he's better than Holding, and then using the argument of, well, Chambers before his injury was great, but Holding was unbelievable before his injury, before his big injury. Arguably, I think that Holding before his injury at Manchester United was better than how Chambers has been prior to his injury. And I think people have forgotten that all of a sudden, because they're looking at the Holding we've got since his injury. And yet, for some reason, there's now a thought that Chambers could be somehow better than how Holding has been after his injury. The thing is, we just don't know. And I think all of that and the COVID market, as you brought up, will mean that players of that sort of stature, they're the players whose prices are going to deflate. You won't see the other players in Europe, the likes of Havertz, the likes of Sancho. Those prices are still going to be huge. But of that tier down and the couple of tiers down that you get to reach the players like Chambers, for instance, those are the prices that are going to start to see some deflation because of the teams that can go in for them and the teams that want to go in for them. None of the top teams in England are looking at Callum Chambers and thinking, yeah, he's a guy that we're going to go and sign. The teams that are looking at Callum Chambers are the Fulhams that have just come up, are the Leeds, are whatever. Leeds obviously being, of course, linked with Rob Holding as well. They're the teams that are looking at these surplus to requirements, not starting for the bigger clubs. And they're the players whose prices are going to be affected the most by this COVID situation, because quite simply, the clubs that are in for them are the ones that are biggest hit by this situation, other than Arsenal, it seems, of course. So yeah, and that's probably a nice place to just sort of corner off the show. But before we do, I want to give a shout out to a couple of questions, if we can hit them very, very quickly. Yeah. Let me just find the one I was going to find. It was by Christopher Fung. Where is it? Here it is. Any interest in any championship players like Eberici Eze? What about looking at domestic in the league? Obviously, we play in the Premier League like Ruben Neves. I think the thing about the Premier League is that they would just cost so much more for players that are in that upper echelon of clubs like Wolves are now, with Ruben Neves as one of their best performers. Championship it's an odd market to try and find, and you rarely get the big gems like you do with like a Said Benrahma, for instance. They don't come up, and I don't honestly know enough about Eze to have a real say on how good he is. I don't know if you have anything to add to that.
I mean, from what I do know, I think it would be in that bracket of we're paying a certain amount of money for what he's going to end up being, not what he currently provides. And I do think for base value now, he is a solid player, but I don't think he comes in here and is the difference between us finishing in Champions League place and Europa League place. I don't think he's at that level yet. I think he's going to be for a while. And if that was the case, he may as well just play Emil Smith Rowe there or someone of the like, you know. I think the Championship can unearth some gems sometimes, but again, if we needed a left-sided midfielder, you could say maybe we take a punt on Benrahma or something like that, because Brentford didn't get promoted as maybe they expected to. But yeah, I don't know. I think that, ironically enough, there's been some other clubs in the Premier League in recent years who have had success in looking at the teams that have just gone down and maybe bringing someone up. You could make an argument for someone like you bring like an Emi Buendia and play him centrally instead of playing him out on the wing because of how creative he actually is. So that could be a shout. But again, how much would Norwich actually charge for him is the question. That's the thing. So they're still within their rights to demand maximum valuation, especially because they're not in the Premier League now. They're not getting Premier League money. The wages could be a potential issue for them. So they're going to want to get good compensation because they have a lot of other things to cover. So, again, it's tricky. I mean, 20 million for Buendia, 25 million for Buendia would be a good shout for me, I think. But you know how English clubs are. They might just say 45 million or bust, and you'd laugh them out of the room. So there's no point even having that discussion. So again, I'm with Iron Club. Like I said, but they would charge more than he is worth, not because they're trying to fleece, but more because they have to get maximum value because of other factors, financial, that they have to cover. Yeah. And so I don't think it's really viable.
Look at how much Ake's gone for Manchester City. Just because the team's been relegated doesn't necessarily mean you're going to get their players on the cheap. Or necessarily because Brentford didn't go up doesn't necessarily mean that you get Ben Rama on the cheap. It doesn't mean that much these days in terms of financial. Final things I want to touch on. Adam Stroud says, are you looking to do a video on Laka potentially swap deals and or replacements? I saw mentions of Douglas Costa come up. I'm not going to answer that just now because that will feature in tonight's show. Of course, it is Wednesday. And as it is Wednesday, we will be having a TGT Writers podcast this evening with myself, Drew, Owen, and possibly John, depending on timings of work and stuff. So fingers crossed we'll see John a little bit later. If you would like to tune in for that, it is at 8:30 UK time. So set your clocks. Make sure you've got those notifications turned on so you can hit us up when we go live at 8:30 UK time, which is 3:30 in the US and Canada. I must mention our Canadian listeners, Christopher Fung. Thank you for reminding me. And of course, our Eastern listeners will have that as a very early morning show. But if you're as committed as Abdullah was when he came on for the Expert Members Pod at 1 o'clock in the morning, then you should be tuning in. There's no excuses now. So 100% be tuning in for that a little bit later on today. And of course, a big thank you to our expert members as well: Robert, Abdullah, Root, Grass, Afnan, and Clarify, Zamir, TD Shifts, Chris P, Ashwin, Owen, Mike, Carl, Gary, Matt from Dial Square to Wear, Jasmine, Olasola, Glenn, Mosaic, PMHK, Brian Robles, Jared Carver, Aaron Letchford, Alex McCarthy, and Avon Tillington has upgraded to a expert member. Thank you, Avon, and the real Janice has joined up as well. So thank you to 2 new expert members as well. If you would like to help the channel and get some exclusive content too, make sure you hit that join button. And of course, there's lots of stuff going on the website. We will touch on it again tonight, but we've got some exciting stuff coming up. There's just recently up on the channel an interview with Drew that Owen has done, talking to Drew about lots of stuff regarding the reasons why Drew got into football. Did you enjoy partaking in that one?
I did. It was actually quite fun. And I even put myself on the block with giving you some of the pictures I gave you, like 14-year-old Drew.
If you would like to see some questionable photos of Drew, please click the link in the description to go to the website. And
they're not questionable. Those are, in fact, Drew.
They are Drew. And one of them is Drew rather intoxicated as well, which is
yeah, great. I was absolutely hammered in that picture.
So if you want to see that, please make sure you go and have a check out that article. Mike McDonald got a guest piece up looking at the is part 1 of the 10 things that Arteta needs to do for next season. Part 2 should be coming out tomorrow. So looking forward to that. You've got Owen's next piece, which I'll let him announce tonight. I'll tease people with that one. So if you want to find out what Owen's next biographical piece is going to be, that'll be out on Friday, and he can let you know what it'll be tonight. Of course, he's done ones on David Luiz and Kieran Tierney so far, and Granit Xhaka, of course, as well. So make sure you check those out too. And me and Drew have got some exciting stuff coming up when a certain announcement could be made in the near future. So you can probably guess who that's about. But we'll see you again very, very soon. Drew, it's been a pleasure as always, mate. I'll see you in 4 or 5 hours. 5?
Yeah. 5 hours, yeah.
5 hours time. So yes, you can have a break from me for a bit, and then you get me again. So there you go.
Gross.
And finally, last plug, 89 did the interview with Amy Lawrence yesterday. If you have not checked that out, please make sure you go and check out that and give the book a purchase, because it's a really good one. I don't get paid anything for it. It's just a great read. So please make sure you go and check that out. We will see you again very, very soon. And as always, up the Arsenal.